Hi, everybody. I'm Tiffany Bradley, and this is Art Off Pause. Today we have our lovely guest, Bimbola Akinbola, who is joining us from Chicago. So, number one, thanks everybody for making it out. We had to reschedule based on nature. It's been a year of plagues and hurricanes and all sorts of crisis. So, Bimbola and I have actually been talking since May 1st, if you can imagine. And we're finally getting to sit down and do this. So I'm Tiffany Bradley. We have a chat on the sidebar. So if you have questions for Bimbola, you can chat them there. There's also an ask a question functionality on the bottom of your little bar. So those are the two places you can chime in. If you're on YouTube, hey YouTube, you can ask questions, but we still love you. And so let me introduce Bimbola, and we'll go from there. So Bimbola Akinbola is an interdisciplinary scholar and artist based in Chicago. Working at the intersection of visual and performance art, her creative work is concerned with Black bodies and leisure, the complicated and nagging nature of belonging, queer worldmaking, and African diasporic nostalgia. She has a PhD in American Studies from the University of Maryland and is currently the Black Arts Initiative Performing Arts Fellow at Northwestern University. She's working on her first book manuscript, which examines the creative work of contemporary Nigerian diasporic women artists. And we can get way into that and way into the brilliance and copiousness of the Nigerian diaspora. As a scholar of museums and material culture, Bimbola has also written about the museum space as a site of dissent and the race, class, and gender politics of community engaged programming. And in addition to her scholarly work, she has worked on a number of performance-based projects exploring racism, memory, and historical erasure in collaboration with dance companies, universities, and independent choreographers. Which is all to say she has a lot of knowledge and experience that is pertinent to this moment. Can everybody hear us? Say hi in the chat if you can hear us. So as we were preparing for this conversation, we had a lot of discussions about a lot of different things. And as we were talking, I found an interview with Injeka Crosby that was done by the Brooklyn Rail in June. And I loved it, Bimbola loved it, so I decided that this would be a good critical source to start off our discussion. And Injeka talks about her time at Yale getting her MFA, and basically the difficulties she had. So it's going to be a long full quote. It's all her first person experience, but I think it's a great place to start today. She says, I got a letter in my first semester that I was on academic warning, that they didn't know what I was doing. In the second semester, I was put on academic probation because I wasn't working, which was ridiculous. Of course, this was years before I even knew the term racial microaggression. Microaggression is the wrong term to use because there's nothing micro about it when you're in the middle of it. It's very soul crushing. Anyway, I don't want to go back to an angry, sad place, but it was a very mixed bag. I don't think this is something that's unique to Yale, because what has been most shocking to me when I go to schools and talk to other students is to see how many other people of color have these kinds of experiences in graduate programs. Not even in art, in various creative fields. Jeremy O. Harris just did a tweet thread this week about how horrible his time at the Yale School of Drama was, and his clashes and not feeling supported. So it's everywhere. I remember being at Skidmore and talking to two Black women who came to see the show, and they were talking about their grad school experience, and it was like a mirror of mine. They were talking about this experience they had in this one class, where you say something, and your teacher ignores you, and then someone else does the same thing, someone who's probably a white man, and the teacher affirms what they say, like, oh yeah, that's good, and you continue the discussion. And it happens often enough that you actually just end up shutting up in the class. You know, when you just have that light bulb, like, oh my God, that happened to me. And at the end of class, you just go in and you sit down and you say nothing, because in your mind, you just think, well, this teacher is acting like I have nothing to say. And if everything I have to say is garbage, I'll just sit down. The point I'm making is that it's not just Yale. I think that's why a lot of institutions have been putting affirmative statements out about how they support the movements happening right now, and Black Lives Matter. And I love that people are calling them out. Because you really have to examine your institution and the way you act towards students of color you bring in. If you're going to say that truth, that Black Lives Matter, if you're going to make that affirmation, you actually have to be a place that proves it. So on that note, I will toss to you, Bimbola, and you can talk about how you were working before the COVID, racial justice, economic, all of the interlocking crises, and how your work has evolved in this time.
Whew, that interview. So thank you for sending me that interview, because I hadn't seen it yet, and I've been reading about Akinbola Crosby's work for a long time and hadn't actually read anything where she talked about her experiences at Yale. I think it's so important because, especially with these institutions like Yale that are known for putting out just like, you know, with so many of the famous painters, especially that we know, that it's important for Black women artists to be like, yeah, I went to Yale and I'm a great painter, and it also wasn't that great. I'll say that in my graduate school experience, I feel pretty fortunate because I went into it hearing a lot of stories. Like, it's really the level of like racism and sexism and just violence that's in the academy, like anyone that's in the academy knows. So I went in with all of these awful stories, both about the experiences, the kind of violent experiences that Black women had both with white people in the academy, but also with like other Black women in the academy. And, you know, one of the pieces of advice that everyone gave coming in to grad school was like, get a therapist. Like, just like right off the bat, get a therapist. Doesn't matter if you need one or if you think you need one, like just get one from the go so that you're ready. So I did that, and it was great, you know, just to like, it's such a specific experience and so many people can't relate and don't understand it. My program was actually, at the time that I entered, primarily Black and brown people. So I was, and it was at University of Maryland, but I was living in DC. And so I actually had this experience coming from Minnesota where when I got to DC, I would actually go kind of long periods of time without seeing white people. Like, I had white housemates, but I wouldn't necessarily see them in my neighborhood. I wouldn't necessarily see them on the train, and then I wouldn't see them in my department. But then I might get on the train and like go to Columbia Heights and then see like a lot of white people at one time and kind of notice like, oh, wow. And so in terms of spaces where I was experiencing that type of racism, I felt a little, for me, being in grad school and being in DC was really refreshing, coming from a place like Minnesota and coming from a predominantly white institution.
So tell us about your manuscript, your PhD work, and why the Nigerian diaspora?
Such a big question. So I went to grad school planning to write about archives, the body as an archive. I was really inspired by the work of Diana Taylor and Ralph Lemon. And I wanted to write about, I thought the dissertation was going to be about trauma. Sometimes I go back and read my statement of purpose just to like remember where the project started. I had been writing about Japanese internment, Japanese American internment, and I was really interested, and I've always been interested in questions of kind of first and second generation Americans. I'm, first generation Nigerian American. I didn't want to write. I think it's important that I say now that I actually did not want to write about the Nigerian diaspora, and it was something that I resisted for several years in grad school. I wanted to look at other second generation people and kind of, for me, it felt good to kind of read about other experiences and kind of put them in conversation with one another. I knew that I wanted to read about art. I had been a visual artist. I was double majoring in American Studies and visual art in undergrad. And when I went to Maryland, like it was interesting because I remember them offering me like a tour of the arts facilities. Like it was something that I really put forth. Like I'm an artist and I want to do art practice here, and I want to figure out how to like really weave practice into my dissertation. So I was going to write about trauma. I was going to write about archives, and I honestly, I don't really, I found an artist by the name of Pastel Portraits, who I stumbled upon her work truly, and she's mixed race. She's living and working in Nigeria, and she had been doing all of this incredible performance art in Lagos. And I think I was first sort of struck by her audacity. Like I thought at that time, I had been going to, visit my parents in Nigeria in the summers. And so I had all of these experiences in Nigeria, all of these experiences of kind of like, right, this place that's supposed to feel like home, this place that's the home of your parents and grandparents, and this place that, is like all of the feelings of outsiderness and like all of the tensions around belonging, especially as a woman. And so I was really kind of in awe of the way that Ogunji was able to go into like the streets and do performance work. And there was a way that she just like showed up and took up space, and she wasn't raised by her Nigerian parent. She wasn't like, I grew up kind of in a Nigerian community in the Midwest. And so I had a lot of like, you are Nigerian, here's what that looks like around me. She didn't necessarily have that, but yet I felt like she went and she just completely claimed this place as home. And so, and then honestly, the other artists that I found kind of a little bit, it was through her. So, I was writing about her. And then I think I next decided, I wish I could remember the order. It feels so long ago now. But, Ruby Amanze, who I write about in my final chapter, is a close friend and collaborator of Ogunji. And so I was going to Lagos for a fellowship, and Ura sent me this list of, it was an alien's guide. What was it, an alien's guide to Lagos, maybe? And it was like a list of places to go and people to see. And one of them was Ruby, who was going to be there. So we had beers, and we went to like an open mic night, I think, and we just got along well. I knew she was an artist, but I wasn't super familiar with her art. And then maybe a year later, I went and saw them do a joint exhibit together. And I saw the pieces in person, and they were like absolutely stunning and everything that I wanted to write about. And I was like, oh, I'm gonna write about Ruby. So like that was a very organic connection. And then it was like, okay, am I gonna only write about Nigerians? And I had a mentor in grad school that was like, I don't want to write about Nigerians. And she was like, well, why? And I'm like, well, it just feels like too specific. And she was like, white men, like white art historians literally write about like one style of tapestry in one city in Italy for like 3 books, and no one tells them it's too specific. Like what feels too specific about it? And I think her pushing back on that was really, it actually shifted me in this direction where I was like, oh, by writing about all of these people who are all like of the Nigerian diaspora, I'm actually going to illuminate how that doesn't tell us anything about how they belong, about how they live their lives, about their values. Like nation is a construct. And actually by being hyper-local and hyper-specific, I'm going to illustrate how like Nigeria is an idea that doesn't necessarily have unifying factors as it lives in like diasporic peoples. And then I'll just say, I decided to write about Ndijeka because I loved her work. I just loved it. And I loved it outside of grad school. Like I was just like, oh, I see this person's work and it makes me feel all the things. And then I was like, oh, I guess I could just write about her. I was like, oh, I love that about the humanities. Like, you can just write about things that you love, that you just already are liking. And she fit in really well. She's by far the most kind of like famous artist in my project. And so it was a little bit harder trying to like talk to her. I emailed her or her assistant for like a year, we'll talk. And they were like, well, she can't do it now. And I was like, it's okay. I'm in grad school. I'm here. I'm here for years. And then I got an email, like, I think I shot, you know, I was just like, let me just like try one more time. And I got an email and it was like, can you talk this week? And it was right before she was about to have her baby, her first baby. And so, yeah, so we had this great phone conversation. It was kind of an off the record thing just for me, for minutes. But I felt really good that I was able to talk to her, because I think maybe a lot of us decide not to write about more famous people or popular people because it feels like it'll be harder to actually engage them around their work.
Wow, thinking so many thoughts. So it's interesting to think, as a Nigerian American, that you had to take a long way around to feel like this was a worthwhile field of study or a worthwhile discussion for you to be in. And then also the entry barrier of, for the people in our community who are famous or quote unquote famous, then it makes it harder for us sometimes to gain access to them as we're doing our scholarship. Not necessarily because that individual feels a certain way, but just the, I guess, noise around people when they're anointed an art star or become the one Black person that everybody is calling for public programming or exhibitions or. But I would love you to talk a little bit about portraiture, both because I feel like a lot of the women who you've studied have portraiture as part of their work, but also for you to talk a little bit about your work in portraiture, especially around COVID relief.
Great questions.
20 questions.
Yeah. I love, and I think, I don't know if I can say I've always loved, but for me, I love the human body. I love like depictions of the body. I love portraiture. I love the intimacy of it, and kind of the, I think it's actually probably very connected also to just like, I like people, I like talking to people, I like reading about how people like live. And so portraiture just feels like an extension of that. And, you know, I've started a couple of different projects thinking about the relationship between a form like portraiture and something like, and like ethnography. And, you know, like there's the act of sitting with someone and kind of deeply listening to them, both to what the words that are coming out of their mouth, but also to their body language. But there's also there's a way that you look at people when you're painting them or when you're drawing them that is like next level. And so I think that, you know, for this project, immediately I kind of start with my personal interests. It's like I start with what I'm already drawn to. It's very selfish in that way. It's like I write the things that I want to read. I think Andy Cosby talks about this. Like she painted the images that she wanted to see, like especially the early images of her and her white partner. It was like she was like, I'm not seeing images of Black women and like white men in love. I really want to like see these images. I'm just gonna create them. And so in terms of like, I think it's all connected, but it's in a very intentional way where it's like, yeah, I write about artists that do this because I love doing it, and it's all concerned with my interest in people and community and like the human psyche. And it's, you know, it's why I majored I got my PhD in American Studies. Like I think that there was a way that going through American Studies, I was able to So this was the thing. So I had my co-chairs were in art, between art history and American studies. And I think it was really important for me to do this project in American studies rather than in art history, because it was a project about diaspora. Like, I was like, it's like, I want to say something about diaspora, and I want to say something about female diasporic subjectivity. Whereas in art history, I felt like there was this pushing me towards saying very specific things about the art, which is important, and that's why I use art historical methods. But ultimately, I'm like interested in like people. Like, how do people do things? How do we understand each other? How do we explain or describe our experience? All of that, and like art is one way that people do all of those things. And so in some ways, I think of art and portraiture as a method, as a tool, as like a way to further a research agenda, more so than like something that's purely for aesthetic purposes. And then in terms of the COVID portraitures that I was doing, which actually started, it's funny, it started before. I started doing those portraits in January or February.
Tell folks who don't know you or aren't on your Instagram what those portraits are.
So I started doing these oil pastel portraits that were inspired by stills that I took of people that I was talking to on this app called Marco Polo. I guess this is like an unofficial app for Marco Polo now. And and I what was it? It was like I wanted to draw people, but I didn't have people around me. I didn't have the people that I wanted to draw around me. And there's something about like the screenshot that happens in Marco Polo that allowed for these really lovely candid moments. Because I think that I'll speak for myself, when I'm talking on Marco Polo, it doesn't feel like FaceTiming or like Zoom. It's like I am, maybe for the first moment, I'm like aware that I'm making a video that I'm sending to someone, but then I kind of forget myself a little bit and I'm just talking. And so I find myself Marco Poloing. I'm vaguely aware of like, oh, let me like fix my hair or put a shirt on or something. But I find myself really like, I think I show up very authentically when I'm sending Marco Polo messages, and I think others do as well. So I started doing these kind of quick pastel portraits, and then, you know, it was like as if I had guessed it, you know, suddenly I was talking to everyone on Marco Polo. And I'll also add, because I just remembered that the first portrait that I did was of my friend Kalina, who passed away a few years ago. And so it actually started because I had this long archive of conversation with Kalina, and I was really like struck by how very much like alive and real and present she felt in them. And so drawing from that felt like the closest I could get to doing a real life portrait. And then as I started doing them, right, like I started kind of placing them on my walls, surrounding myself by like all of these images of people that I love. And then like, I was doing those already. And then around, I don't know, May, maybe I had this idea that, you know, I was thinking, I didn't feel like making art. I felt really like, so I like stopped making art at the start of the pandemic. I was like, art feels like a very useless thing to be producing right now. And I don't know, was journaling and had this thought like, okay, what feels important right now? So I made a list of all of the people that felt very important. I was like, you know, grocery store workers, doctors, nurses, you know, postal workers, delivery, blah, blah, blah. And then I was like, you know, artists made the list. Like, artists did make the list. And I was like, okay, cool. So if I am going to show up, funny enough, for me in that moment, scholars did not make the list. So I was like, okay, I'm going to like shift, right, and think about like what's the art intervention I can make. And that was how I came up with this idea of doing the commissions. So doing the portrait commissions, which originally were going to be like, literally, I will do like a quick pastel portrait of your choosing, sliding scale. I think I said 60 to 80. All of the money is going to go into a fund that's basically going to be a tip jar to support these people that I've listed that some which, who are very well paid, like doctors, but some who are very poorly paid, like grocery store workers. And the idea was that people would just be able to apply and, get $50 to $100 just for like a nice meal or groceries or whatever we spend $50 to $100 on. So not these huge grants that people were giving out, but just like pocket money, literally. And so because I have, I don't know, poor boundaries around like what I want to give people would send me these really like beautiful photographs that were way too detailed for me to do in pastel. And so then I started doing them in gouache. These like, and let me say for the record now, some of you all's portraits literally took me like 7, 8, 9, way too many hours, way more hours than I had said it was going to take. But because of my commitment to it looking a certain way, I'm a Virgo, I'm a perfectionist, and my art is not spared from that. So I was like, it doesn't matter. And so I ended up doing a combination of pastel and gouache portraits, depending on what felt best for the image. And then sending them out to people. And I don't know, it felt really great. I loved that. Honestly, the photos themselves take an image or tell a story. Like the photos that people chose to have like replicated in another form, to me, it was like, oh wow, these are like some of your most, this is like a special image. And I did some pets, which were like really fun. And I did, babies, and I did parents. And so I did those until I was just like exhausted because I was just like 7 days a week painting all day. But we raised close to, I think, $1,300 for the Tip Jar Fund. And there's still money in the fund for those of you who would like to apply. So.
That's marvelous. And I think based on your retelling of the story and the list, maybe the reason that artists made the list is that this portrait project was a way for you to keep people close, whether they were deceased or we just can't see them because of COVID times. And it sounds like I embraced your perfectionist Virgo tendencies, but that it was a meaningful exercise for you as well to feel connected in some way.
Yeah, I appreciate that reflection because I'm feeling more and more like all of the work, like it feels like more and more keeping people close, like I like that phrasing of it, is kind of behind so many of the projects that I'm feeling drawn to now. Things around connection, around keeping people close, both like within a COVID context, but also just, I don't know, I don't think that we are as close or as intentional with our relationships as we can be. And I think that this is like a great moment to kind of practice that, work that muscle.
So hi internet friends, I'll bring us one-to-one again. We're at about half an hour, so if you have questions for Bimbola, you can ask them in the chat. I haven't been keeping, oh, y'all are talking it up. But, okay, Emma has a question about your approach to mentoring students.
That's such a good question. Yeah, so my approach to mentoring students, I feel like my mentoring happens, in very informal ways, kind of in the classroom setting. Honestly, I really believe that in most cases, and this was not necessarily the case when I was teaching like courses like American Studies 101, where people really were coming in like brand new. But in most cases, I really feel like my job as a professor is to, especially with grad students. I taught grad students I've been teaching grad students at Northwestern, both in mixed classes and also just grad classes. And with grad students specifically, there's so much insecurity around ideas. Like students have these phenomenal ideas and they kill them before it even makes it out of their mouths. And so I see a lot of my mentoring is like being like, just say it, just do it, kind of like that extra push. And, being really affirming, really naming what I see working. That's very much, I'll just say, that's colored by my like work in Liz Lerman's critical response process. And like, you know, so much of that feedback process is about like, what are you seeing? What is working? And about helping people move through a project in a way that keeps them excited. And so I see my mentorship as that. Like, how can I help you do the thing that you're already excited about? How can I help you, right? Like if the goal is to complete a PhD program, how do I mentor you in completing the PhD program, which might require you to compromise in certain ways or not? And I don't know, I just feel like I want to be an ally. Like my goal is just to be an ally. And also, I'll say something I don't want to compromise on is like really pushing like deep, like rigorous, slow investigation. So also the ways that students can get pushed towards productivity, moving forward, moving fast, what's the next thing, in a way that keeps them from reading deeply, from looking deeply, from pausing to figure out what it is that they want to say. My courses, I tend to be like, we're reading this book, but like expect to read it, 5 more times. Like, you don't, this doesn't, if this is just about productivity and about moving on to the next thing, then like you will not find satisfaction in this particular profession. And I think the last thing is just really emphasizing, like, I know, right, self-care feels really cliche, but self-care practices, sleeping, resting, taking time off, like going and being with your family if you need to be, like not getting into this weird martyr thing where you're keeping up everything all the time and running on empty. Because again, I'm really interested in ways of being in the academy that are sustainable and long lasting. I don't want to keep seeing Black women in their 50s and 60s, especially like getting really sick and having to leave because they like denied themselves so much for so long. And we can stand to slow down. We can stand to slow down and like figure out how to move forward from a place of groundedness and not like insecurity and fear and resentment and bitterness, like all of that. It's easy that comes in.
I concur. I co-sign all of that. And I think that's a great pivot to the performance piece that does not exist yet, but may. Let me grab my notes so I can say the right thing. And hey, Jamila, I see you talking about the notion of too specific. And I actually, before I get to the performance piece, I want to loop back on the discussion of you coming out of American Studies and feeling like that was really crucial. I feel like so many of the Black women in the art world who I talk to who really feel supported in the work that they do did not come from art history backgrounds. I decided not to pursue art history as an undergraduate because there was a requirement to read a Romance language, and my second reading language is Arabic, and I was like, I'm not learning French just to make somebody else happy. But what does it say about our art history curricula that if you are people-centered or want to reflect the experiences of people of color, our art historical curricula doesn't have that. People have to move sideways from Africana studies or AmCiv or anthropology. And then as a sector, are we hiring those people even though they may not have an art history degree? So that's just a think back to Jamila, who's talking about too specific. It's like, what is too specific? Wow. Is it too specific to say everybody needs to be able to read Italian and talk about Renaissance art like in 4 hours? Like to be able to name that slide with Renaissance art, but they have no knowledge of, for example, as Nneka says, the fact that Nigeria is a colonial construct, and that even though it's a big, ginormous country, it can't be too specific because there are so many different peoples living in there.
Yeah. It's like when you lay it out like that, it's so obvious. It's like, it's a lie, right? It's a lie. I mean, it's Eurocentrism. It's white supremacy, shielded as something else. I mean, I don't know. I'm curious about the history of art. The future of art history. I'm curious about it. Like, because I think that there are also a lot of people trained in art history that are going into that are training people to do art history and really. Yes. So I'll say that. Let me say, as I slightly
thanks Angela in the chat.
As I slightly shade art history, my greatest mentors have been art historians. Real talk. With critiques of art history.
We love you, art historians. We critically love you.
Thank you, art history. It's true. Art history is why my looking practice is as sharp as it is, because there are a lot of people who write about art with no art historical training, who use works of art as props on top of theory, and we see that it's well, where did the work go? You said that you were going to talk about this work, but it completely vanished halfway into the chapter. So that's also
or as props in service of caricature. You said you were going to talk about this culture, but all you're doing is recycling stereotypes because you didn't take the time to learn anything about that particular culture.
Right.
Moving along to performance. One of the things that you had to press pause on was an 8-hour durational performance of the 18-step electric slide titled You Gotta Know It, which was going to happen at the Museum of Contemporary Art in Chicago. Tell us what is happening with that and give us a little refresher on the history of the electric slide. I found out things in the past day that I never knew, so go for it.
I cannot give you a refresher on the history of the electric slide because it's been, I got really deep into the research around it before I started this project, and then when COVID hit, it's a back burner, so it's super rusty in my mind. What I can say is that what surprised me was that the choreographer of the actual steps is a white man. I don't know his name. This is probably his problem. There's an NPR article about how for a minute he was gonna sue people who were using the electric slide inaccurately.
We agree with you, Angela.
And what else? Yeah, so there's actually this wonderful NPR article about it. I encourage everyone to go read it because that's where I learned all the things. The project came about because I was a part of a Black performance theory, I wish I can remember, kind of 4-day meeting that happens annually. And I was invited to participate last year. And in that meeting, you create performance work within kind of randomly assigned groups. And it's a mix of practitioners and visual artists and poets and scholars. And so one of the performance pieces that, one of my colleagues created had this electric slide component. And it was really interesting because, the group had 4 or 5 people and they just started doing it. And then very quickly, the whole room was doing it. And it was really powerful to me how quickly we were able to come into unison like that. And then something fascinating happened kind of later in the day. Someone said, when we were doing feedback, someone said, thank you for humoring our kind of, what they say, thank you for humoring, our electric slide, even if it was a little bit corny. And there was an audible gasp in the room. People were like, oh! And so I felt this really interesting thing that happened where I was like, oh, people there's a affective response to insulting this electric slide. And so we went to some kind of gathering that night, and we were driving back to the hotel late at night. And I literally was like, we should do a 24-hour durational electric slide piece. And people were 24 hours. So that's too long. I'm like, no, we could do it. And so when I came back, I couldn't stop thinking about it. I was like, the movements are not super challenging. Most people know it, and I'm interested in this idea of choreography that people just have in their body already. Like choreography that I could probably go out into like my apartment courtyard right now and start doing the electric slide, and like a bunch of people would come and do it with me.
You could start playing it out of your window, and you would see people like assuming you live around any Black people.
I know.
Yeah. Come into their porch or their front yard.
Right? And so, yeah, that was really exciting to me. And then I started asking people, like, when did you learn the electric slide? And like remembering, people learning it in elementary school, in PE, like people learning it as public education curriculum, and so eventually the performance, I sat on it for a year, and I didn't reach out. I was trying to figure out where to stage it. I spent a lot of time emailing people, figuring out it needed to happen not outside, because it's, in Chicago, the temperature is like always at extremes. I wanted to happen in a public space that was accessible to everyone in the city, because also Chicago is really big, and like if it's on the north side, no one's going to come from the south side. Like if it was at Northwestern, it would be hard to get people from the south side. If it's on the south side, it'd be hard to get people from the north side. West side is impossible to get by public transportation. So they were like, this place that I live now created all of these obstacles, figuring out where to place it. And then I will say I had this dream. I was like the MCA. I was like, I want it to happen at the MCA, because the MCA is free to residents on Tuesdays. It's accessible by like everything. There's a shuttle that goes directly there from Northwestern. Like it just felt perfect, and it felt like a reach. But I worked my connections, and I just tried, and I emailed, and literally 3 weeks before shutdown, I had just met with them, and like we were like, I was going to happen as part of their live performance festival. That would have been in July. So it's rescheduled, it's postponed now. We're thinking and talking about the possibility of having it happen online. It's now, I don't know if I already said this, I'll say it again. It's no longer going to be a 24-hour thing. It's now an 8-hour thing, which is still super long. And that was also thinking about the 8-hour work day. Yeah, 8 hours is
8 hours is plenty, Emily. Yes.
So like, and oh yes, and to Brooke's point, doing other songs. So also, I have my partner Elise, like we're doing this soundscape. So like creating a musical kind of sound accompaniment that it does not mean doing it to the electric slide, because who wants to listen to that song for 8 hours, but rather doing it to sounds of rain, to sounds of static, to songs that are really slow and songs that are really fast, to kind of ask the body to keep on responding to it. So you have the choreography that you can kind of take for granted, but then the sound adds this new element to be responding to, plus the sense of having to be in sync with everyone and having to kind of collectively orient yourself to the pace that the people you're doing it with. So we're trying to see if we can live online. I'm really curious about that. I actually feel a little excited about it, but there's some research that needs to happen first.
Yeah, and latency, I feel like, is such a huge issue for social dance online.
Yes.
Which, guys, if you're not a dance nerd or a tech nerd, it means that syncing the video to the sound doesn't always work depending on people's internet connections, depending on their audio. So if you have lots of people dancing in little Zoom screens, they may be asynchronous, and then it makes everybody a little bit nauseous and crazy. So I have so many questions, even though it's postponed. So is it like everybody can come out? Are you tagging people in and out in this concept, or will it be the same group of folks for multiple hours?
Yeah, so it was the idea was that I would be the through line. So I'm doing it for the full 8 hours, and people are essentially invited to join and follow away as they like. So, the visual, when I visualize it, it's kind of like almost these waves, right? Where like, and when it was going to happen in the MCA, I imagine, maybe you have 50 people at one time, and maybe you have 2 at another time. And over the course of 8 hours, people can stop in, go get lunch, come back, go to work, come back. Like I wanted it to be something that people could enter and exit kind of at their leisure, essentially.
And I just want to highlight how intentional the process of finding a venue that multiple folks can access. And yes, Emily, I love the idea of doing the electric slide while eating lunch, but that when we talk about art experiences and art audiences, we don't often talk about segregation and critical geography. And in most American cities or most American towns, there still is a Black side and a white side, and the arts institutions are usually in the white side. So if you are trying to actually curate or produce a performance that really draws from multiple audiences, then you really have to think about location, access, physical access, and all of those things. So Angela, Brooke, Emily, hey. So I actually have a strong feeling about dancing the electric slide to things that are not the electric slide. Like even Beyonce Homecoming is a little bit of a switch up for me, but yeah, I'm a classicist in that way.
I feel like I mostly dance it to not the electric slide.
Really?
What I'm learning from this soundscape, because I basically was like, I don't want to know what's on the soundscape until it's time to go. So we did a couple of practice, like 1 hour practice sessions. And like the sound, I was like, you know, like the kind of quick work, like, can I do the electric slide to this sound of an industrial fan? Like, you know, or like, can I do the electric slide to this classical song? I find really fun. I think it speaks to like, you know, what does it mean to have rhythm? Like there's something about like finding the rhythm that feels like a good challenge that people generally are pretty good at meeting.
I think that's the performance artist part of you. Whereas for me, I'm like, it's a classical line dance, right? Like line dances are like, they are accessible to so many generations and so many folks because there is no difficulty in it, right? Like, if you Debka, like you could do the smart Debka or the dumb Debka. If you Hora, you know what it is. If you're doing the achy breaky heart, you don't have to like get creative with the achy breaky heart, right? Like, you know, there is a Jamila saying, yes, Jamila, there is a divide. And I think that between people who can improvise choreography and people who can't improvise choreography. And I think that gets into aptitude and performance and sort of like cultural comfort too, right? Like there are ways in which some folks grow up more improvisational than others. And being able to improvise means being able to fail, right? So to really just be able to do the classical version means that you don't have to work too hard. You know, like if you have a baby on your hip and a drink in your hand, you can still keep up. So that's that. Questions from the audience, because we're at about 50 minutes. So I know even in COVID lockdown, people have places to go. People have other things to do sometimes. So if you have questions for us.
Thank you for your chat engagement. I'm loving all of it.
Yes. And Angela, I'll loop back and say also that I'm almost 2 decades out of school now. So I will also shout out all of the art historians who have published and made amazing work since I graduated. So when I talk about the curriculum, I'm a little bit of an old lady now. So I realize that there are a lot of art historians who are taking different approaches and looking at things differently. And yes, Jamila, I think there does become like a awareness or a belonging about certain choreographies.
Yeah, and I also just want to add, like, Jamila, that point that you're raising, and also what you're saying, Tiffany, like, all of that is actually kind of what inspired this performance. The fact that when we think of it, it's like this easy, fun, Black, collective thing that everybody knows, but it actually is really charged for a lot of people, and there is a risk that everyone takes when they enter. Like that. It's as right wherever you have joy and collectivity and kind of like that sense of belonging that you can take for granted. You also have the opportunity to fail and to become an outsider, and like there's a fear of that, and all of that lives in the electric slide. And you literally, if you look at everyone doing it, you see it. You see like somebody misses a step and it's like, they might see, and like all of that anxiety and tension is something that I want to dig deeper into, and really, like if you give it 8 hours, how much can you reveal?
Or do we just all burst into tears?
Yeah, right?
At the collective labor and emotion of it all. And I will also shout out Sydney Mosley, the choreographer. So when she leads 2020 energy, just fall out and cry. Sydney Mosley, who's a choreographer and trainer, always closes all of her sessions with the wobble. That's like her closing thing.
Yeah, I love that.
And I do not, like, the wobble is not something that I grew up with. So I'm always confused. Moving, but confused. So wrapping it up, what do you hope that we all learn from the 2020 energy and all that we've been through thus far?
Woo. What do I hope that we all learn? I think we're learning it. I was just I was just zooming into the Allied Media Conference and feeling really energized and excited about all of the conversations, specifically around access and around care. I think that we are learning to, like I said earlier, slow down. I think we are learning that when we support and participate in hyperproductivity and like efficiency at all costs and charging along like things are fine, we are all being complacent in systems of white supremacy. And so I think that there's a way that it's like self-care, slowing down, is not just about you taking care of yourself, but it's actually about helping create systems for, everyone to thrive. And we're just living it. Like, it took a really long time for people to start. I'm loving it, like being on Zoom and, seeing all of the ways that people are adapting, seeing all of the people that wouldn't have been able to show up to things who now can. I'm feeling it in myself, like a different way of being present. And also a different way of being able to check in with myself about like, do I want to be doing this with my time? Do I want to be listening to this live stream? Do I want to be zooming into this panel? It doesn't feel like it behooves us very much right now to kind of just like show up to be seen. And so I think the moving with slowness and intention is something that I hope we carry forward. I know I will. And I think like being flexible, right? Like we're being super flexible. And I am someone who is a planner. I like to have like a tight agenda and kind of know what's going to happen. But I also do thrive on my feet. Like if something wild happens, I adjust really quickly, but I hate it. Like I don't want to have to do that. And so I think over the last 5 months, I've just been like, doing it. Okay, it's fine. And I'm now kind of leaning into this idea that like nimble, right? Like you have to be nimble, and I want to feel more comfortable with being nimble. And I want us all to be more comfortable with being nimble, because when we don't want to be nimble, that's how we end up with these systems that not only like oppress people, but literally kill us. Like that's how we end up with systems that kill us, is when we refuse to be nimble and when we refuse to be flexible and to adjust.
I think that's a great spot to end on. Thank you to Bimbola Akinbola. Thank you so much, artist, scholar, person of excellence. Thank you to all of our friends in the chat, Angela, Emma, Neka, Patrick, Emily, Donna. I know Shar, you were up there, Jamila, Brooke, all of these fun folks. Thank you so much. So for Colored Criticism and Art Off Pause, our schedule is wonky because the world is wonky, but stay tuned. There will be more. There's always more. Hopefully we'll be having some international artists in the next couple of months, so that'll be great. And this conversation will be archived on YouTube. So stay tuned. Thank you guys.
So much, everyone.